I lived for 24 years inside a religious lie, worshipping gods that never heard me, seeking answers that never came. Every Hindu festival, every ritual, felt like a mask covering the emptiness I felt inside me, until something happened that changed everything. It was a simple realization that made me see the impossible, that everything I believed was wrong, and that the true answer was in Islam. But truth didn't come without pain, without resistance, not from my family and not from society. My journey to Islam was a confrontation with my entire world, and I didn't know if I would survive it. My name is Priya, I'm 28 years old, and I was born into a Hindu family in India. Since I was a child, I was immersed in the traditions of my culture, but I never found peace. I spent most of my life trying to understand something that never felt complete, until I finally found the truth I had been searching for. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching this video from. Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like mine. I was born into a devout Hindu family in New Zealand, where traditions were sacred and respected. My mother, always dressed in traditional attire, would take me to temples, and our life revolved around rituals and festivals like Diwali and Holi. I loved the vibrant colors and the scent of incense, but at the same time, I felt that all of it was more connected to culture than to a true connection with the divine. It was as if spirituality was dressed up as celebration, but without the depth I longed for. I was surrounded by images of gods and goddesses, and even though I participated in everything with enthusiasm, there was always a part of me that felt out of place. In that environment, I realized that religious matters, instead of bringing me clarity, only confused my faith even more. The stories and deities, each with their own narrative and purpose, seemed distant from the simplicity of a single purpose. Deep down, there was always something in me that longed for something more direct, something that transcended the multiple gods and the celebrations that, as exciting as they were, didn't fill the emptiness inside me. I couldn't understand how there could be so many gods for so many situations, and how that could truly fill my heart. And so, despite all the festivities and social gatherings, true spirituality felt like a distant concept. It was during my time at university, already living in New Zealand, that I started questioning my relationship with religion even more. My youth was filled with parties and fun, like any typical student. But at the same time, something inside me was unsettled. When I met some Muslims, the idea of Islam touched me in a way I didn't expect. They spoke of one God, and their words about life's purpose and a direct connection with God, without intermediaries, sounded like the answer I had been searching for all along. It wasn't an attempt to convince me. It was a genuine sharing of belief, and in that moment, I realized something about it deeply resonated with me. The concept of one God. Where I once saw Hinduism as a tradition without a real purpose, Islam seemed to offer something I truly believed in, even if I didn't know how to explain it. The simple but profound belief in one God aligned with something I intuitively felt. But at the same time, that discovery brought internal resistance, because I knew that changing my faith would not only mean a transformation within me, but also a break from my family and community. In New Zealand, in a culturally diverse, and at times even hostile context, I would have to face not only the challenge of changing my faith, but also of adapting to a new way of life, with new religious practices, and even the use of hijab, which would mean a complete transformation in my lifestyle and in the way I'd be perceived. That was the first internal battle I faced: how to reconcile what I felt as truth with social and family expectations. It was when I began studying more about Islam, learning about the purpose of life and the simplicity of devotion to a single God, that my decision became even clearer. I knew that this change meant a new beginning, not just spiritually, but in every aspect of my life. Even with the difficulties, something inside me was ignited. I knew I was on the right path. The decision to follow Islam was clear, but full of challenges. When I converted, I faced unexpected obstacles, especially in New Zealand, where Islam is a minority religion. Wearing the hijab, for example, drew stares, and I was often questioned about my choice. Parties and social gatherings, which were once moments of joy, began to distance me, and my friends, who didn't understand my faith, reacted to my decision with a mix of curiosity and disapproval. However, the biggest difficulty came from within my home. My Hindu family, especially my parents, couldn't understand my transformation. When I told my mother about my conversion, the look on her face was one of shock and sadness. To her, Islam was a strange religion, distorted by media portrayals. I knew she would be disappointed, but I also knew I couldn't turn back. Islam spoke directly to my heart, bringing peace and clarity that Hinduism had never been able to offer. The process of adapting to a new religious identity was gradual. At first, I felt insecure, as if I were being watched, not only by others, but also by myself. How would I be received at work? How would I behave in public? The simple act of wearing the hijab became a powerful symbol, but also a point of internal conflict. Even while being judged, I felt at peace with my decision. Every prayer, every whispered word, confirmed that I was on the right path, despite how lonely and challenging it was. Over time, I saw that embracing Islam wasn't just about changing religions. It was about changing how I saw the world. New Zealand, with its respect for religious diversity, gave me a new perspective on how to live my faith in a society that was still learning to understand me. What seemed like a barrier turned into an opportunity to share my truth with courage. Over time, the resistance from my family and society began to lessen, but the internal challenges remained. Each prayer, each reading of the Quran, revealed to me a deeper connection to my faith and to my purpose in life. The early difficulties I faced, like the misunderstanding from my family, forced me to look more deeply into my own beliefs. Hinduism, which I had always followed in a superficial way, no longer made sense to me. The traditions that once seemed fun or even emotional began to feel empty. The culture of multiple gods and the division of days and festivals to worship different deities caused me growing internal confusion. Somehow, I knew that my belief lay in something simpler, something that connected me to the Creator in a more personal way. I wanted something beyond rituals, something that resonated with my spirit. That's when I began to understand Islam on a deeper level. The concept of one God, the unity of Allah, felt like a relief, a truth I had always sensed but never knew how to express. Each step on my Muslim journey, though full of obstacles, felt like a move toward inner peace. I remember the first times I decided to cover with the hijab. In that moment, it wasn't just about following a rule, it was about a spiritual transformation that made me feel more connected to who I truly was. It felt as though, by covering my head, I was revealing my soul, showing the world that my life now had a purpose far greater than any material or superficial satisfaction. Wearing the hijab became a deeply transformative experience. In the beginning, it was hard. I didn't know how people would react, whether they'd be critical or accept my new appearance. But over time, the hijab became more than a symbol. It became my identity, reflecting not only my faith, but also the courage to live by the principles I had found in Islam. Daily prayers, the discipline of fasting during Ramadan, and the simple act of living in harmony with Islamic teachings began to bring me a sense of belonging I had never felt before. I was no longer just following traditions. I was living with purpose, with a direct connection to Allah. Each day, as I practiced my faith, something in my heart grew warm. I felt that my journey was leading me to a place of lasting peace. Each one of these practices, which at first seemed challenging, gradually became a means of inner transformation for me. My relationship with God deepened, and I began to see the world from a new perspective. Calmer, more centered, more loving. I finally understood what it meant to live for Allah and felt a peace I had never experienced before. That transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, and it was along this path, through challenges and victories, that I found my true identity and purpose in life. The decision to follow Islam and live according to its teachings brought me into deep conflict with my family. What felt to me like a spiritual revelation, something that filled me and gave me meaning, was seen by them as a betrayal. My parents, especially, couldn't understand my choice. To them, Hinduism was the cultural and spiritual heritage we had received, and leaving it meant breaking with a tradition that went back generations. They couldn't understand how I, who had always participated in celebrations and rituals, could now turn away from everything they considered sacred. My mother, in particular, felt the pain of change in her daughter. She said that by converting to Islam, I was rejecting everything she had taught me and the culture she had passed on. To her, Islam felt foreign, something that didn't belong to our family's history. That rejection was an emotional blow for me. I tried to explain my conversion logically, telling her that my decision wasn't against her or our family, but something that came from deep within. But words of love and explanation weren't enough to erase the pain and sadness I saw in her. On those nights when she cried alone, I felt a deep guilt. How could I, a daughter so loved, cause so much pain? However, as time went on, the reality of my decision became unavoidable. My life had changed irreversibly, and the acceptance of others, especially my family, was something I couldn't control. I now had to find a delicate balance, to respect my faith while dealing with the rejection of those I loved most. My father, though more silent on the matter, showed his disappointment in quieter ways, but still, the weight of his disapproval lingered. I knew that to them, this was an irreparable loss. It was as if I had gone to a place they could no longer reach. The hardest part wasn't just the direct rejection, but the silent isolation that began to settle in our home. Conversations about religion became tense, and the silences grew heavier. Even over time, the acceptance I longed for still felt far away, yet something in my heart told me that the path I had chosen was the right one for me. I couldn't go back, not even out of love or fear. My husband's words, always understanding and patient, became my foundation. He taught me the importance of following my faith with dignity, no matter how others reacted. It was during this time of family turbulence that I learned the hardest practice of all: forgiveness. I forgave my family for not understanding, and I learned to forgive myself for making choices that caused pain. The transition to living as a practicing Muslim was not simple, especially in a context where Islam is not the dominant religion. In the beginning, I was guided by curiosity and a desire to follow the teachings that were now part of my life. Wearing the hijab, for example, was something I knew I should adopt, but the decision to wear it in public was a monumental challenge. I had always been an active woman in society, and covering my hair and body more strictly was a shock, not only for me but also for those around me. I didn't know how I would be received on the streets, at work, or even during meetups with friends. The fear of judgment and stigma was always there, but over time, I realized that true liberation wasn't in pleasing others, but in following what I felt was best for my spiritual life. Wearing the hijab was, in fact, a gradual process. I started by wearing it only during specific moments, like when going to the mosque with my family or while at home. But when I wore it in public for the first time, I felt as though a huge responsibility had been placed on my shoulders. I wasn't just representing myself. I was representing all Muslim women who, like me, had gone through a journey of acceptance and resistance. The feeling of being looked at and judged by those who didn't understand my choice was undoubtedly difficult to bear. However, I came to realize that while people may make assumptions, they don't truly understand the depth of our choices or our faith. In addition, food became another area of adjustment. At first, I felt lost regarding what I could and couldn't eat, especially because, as a Muslim, halal food was essential. I often had to learn how to read product labels, understand the culture around halal meat, and even explore new markets and restaurants. However, I soon realized that Islam offered me a more conscious way of living, one aligned with both my health and the morality I believed in. Each meal now became a moment of reflection, something I had never experienced before. Another aspect of adaptation was in my friendships. Most of my friends didn't share the same faith, which often led to tension in conversations about religion. Some asked questions, while others avoided me, unsure of how to react to my transformation. Although it was difficult to lose friends who couldn't accept my new identity, I also discovered a new circle of friendships within the Muslim community. The feeling of belonging to something greater, of being part of a sisterhood that shares similar values and practices, was incredibly comforting. This transition, though full of challenges, gave me a new perspective on life. It wasn't just about changing habits or wearing a veil, it was about a deep internal transformation. Each day, each prayer, and each practice connected me more with the purpose I had always been searching for, something Hinduism could never offer me. The journey was hard, but necessary, and it finally brought me peace with who I am and with the path I chose to follow. In the first few months, the transformation was internal. Deciding to follow Islam wasn't an impulsive act. It was a journey of self-discovery. Islam brought something that Hinduism never could, a clear and profound answer about the existence of one God, something she had always felt in her heart. The idea of no longer dividing her devotion among multiple gods was liberating. For the first time, she found peace, because the doubts that had always followed her began to fade. This change, however, didn't happen instantly. Adopting a new faith required constant dedication. Daily prayer and studying the Quran became part of her new routine. The woman who once limited herself to superficial rituals now found herself immersed in a deep spiritual practice. Being around other Muslims, sharing experiences, and practicing dhikr, constantly remembering God, further strengthened her faith. Still, the greatest challenge was yet to come. reconciling her new identity with her family and social reality, a space full of conflict between her new values and her traditional family's expectations. As her inner peace grew, the world around her became more challenging. Wearing the hijab was one of the most visible changes. Friends and family reacted with shock. To some, it was too radical a shift. To others, it seemed like she was denying her culture and identity. But for her, the hijab wasn't a loss. It was a declaration of dignity and self-respect. It was an act of faith, not of submission. Despite the resistance she encountered, she knew she was doing what was right for her soul. Now, looking back, she realizes that her faith helped her rediscover herself. Islam wasn't just a spiritual transformation. It was also a release from the invisible chains that held her back, whether through religious uncertainty or societal expectations. The biggest obstacle she faced, however, wasn't internal. It was external. The weight of family expectations pressed down like an invisible burden on her shoulders. When she shared with her parents her decision to convert to Islam, she knew it could destroy the relationship she had with them. Her father, a man deeply rooted in Hindu traditions, reacted with fury, believing his daughter was rejecting the family's spiritual heritage. He couldn't grasp the depth of her choice, and his harsh words echoed in her mind. "You're betraying our culture. How could you do this to me?" The pain of seeing the disappointment in her parents' eyes was deeper than any criticism from friends or strangers. She loved them with all her heart, and felt as if she were betraying their trust. But Islam brought her closer to herself. She felt an unbreakable connection to Allah, a peace that transcended any earthly bond. But the pain of being rejected by her own family still weighed heavily. She tried to explain it to them, but words often failed her when she was met with the cold, judgmental gaze of her mother, who worried about the abrupt changes in her daughter. In the months that followed, conversations with her parents became more tense. The emotional distance grew, and the bond that once seemed unbreakable began to fray. For her, converting to Islam didn't mean separating from the love she felt for her family, but rather discovering a spiritual purpose that could no longer be ignored. She tried to soothe broken hearts, but Islam also brought her the strength to understand that sometimes choosing the right path means letting go of certain comforts, even familial ones. However, the process of acceptance was slow. They couldn't understand right away. The woman who once took part in family festivities with so much enthusiasm was now distant, attending the mosque, performing daily prayers, and abstaining from many traditions that had once been so familiar and comforting. Her mother, heartbroken, simply watched in silence, trying to accept what she couldn't comprehend. The impact of her decision wasn't something her parents could easily digest, but over time, small changes began to emerge. Even if Islam was still misunderstood, respect for their daughter, for her courage and for her choice, slowly began to enter their hearts. The acceptance, even if partial, of her new religious identity was a crucial step in her journey. The support of her new Muslim family, including her husband and his mother, who became a pillar of faith and guidance, was what kept her strong. She knew that to live her faith fully, she would have to go through this painful process of separation and resistance. But in her heart, she knew that Islam was her truth, the truth she had been seeking all her life. Islam was not just a new religion for her, it was a new beginning, an internal revolution that transformed the way she saw the world and herself. Daily prayer, fasting, reciting the Quran, each of these became a path of self-discovery that she had never imagined. Over time, praying 5 times a day was no longer a routine, but a genuine connection with Allah. The silence in those moments of supplication became a sacred space where she could reflect on her actions, her emotions, and her relationship with the Creator. She began to understand the true meaning of spiritual purity, something that had fascinated her deeply since childhood, but that she could never find in the empty celebrations and multiple deities of Hinduism. When she looked at the Quran, she felt a clarity she had never experienced before. The words of Allah touched her heart in a profound way, as if each verse had been written just for her. The idea of a single God who guides and loves without distinctions made complete sense to her, and she finally felt at peace with her beliefs. However, the internal challenges remained. The new routine, with strict prayer times and the modesty demanded by her behavior and dress, was not easy. At first, she felt like a stranger in her own skin, trying to reconcile her identity with the new norms that Islam required. Wearing the hijab, for example, was one of the biggest milestones of that transformation. The first time she put it on, she felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride in honoring her faith, and fear of others' reactions, of what she knew people might think when they saw her for the first time wearing the veil. But over time, she began to feel more comfortable, more authentic. The hijab became not just a symbol of modesty, but a constant reminder of her new spiritual journey. Each prayer, each moment dedicated to Allah, made her stronger and more aware of her true identity as a Muslim. She began to see the world through different eyes, more compassionate, more filled with gratitude. Her old struggles started to lose their weight because she felt the strength of her faith flowing through her. But this transformation did not come without sacrifice. The loss of certain friendships, the separation from old customs, and the need to let go of parts of her former life in order to fully embrace Islam were challenges she had to face alone. Yet in her solitude, she found comfort in prayer and in the words of the Quran. Her connection with Allah grew stronger and deeper, giving her the strength she needed to stay firm, regardless of external difficulties. This journey of self-discovery was not just a change in religious identity, but a complete reconfiguration of who she was, her values, her desires, and her perception of the world. She no longer saw herself as someone lost among different beliefs, but as someone finally found, someone who had discovered the true reason to live, to serve Allah with sincerity, and to seek inner truth. The transition to Islam was not a simple change. It was a reinvention of her daily life. Every aspect of her routine was affected, from the way she interacted with the world to how she saw herself. The hijab, which at first seemed like just an external covering, became a reflection of her new way of living, a symbol of her modesty and devotion. With each prayer, her connection with Allah grew stronger, and her identity became more solid. She felt she was finally on the right path, living according to the truth she had found in Islam. However, this process was not free of emotional and social challenges. The resistance from her family, especially her parents, was one of the biggest obstacles she faced. Immersed in a Hindu lifestyle, they couldn't understand her decision to follow Islam. The initial conversations were tense, full of questions and misunderstanding. Their rejection caused emotional distance, making her feel isolated and alone on her new journey. The longing for home, for the celebrations and family traditions, lingered. But she knew that choosing to follow Allah required complete surrender, even if it meant leaving behind what she once knew. Her social life also changed. Childhood friendships and activities that once were part of her routine, like parties and gatherings, began to lose meaning. Many friends didn't understand her transformation, and relationships began to fade. She found herself having to build new bonds, now with people who shared her faith. But adapting to this new Muslim circle was gradual. The process of finding acceptance and belonging in the Muslim community wasn't immediate, but over time, she began to realize that true belonging wasn't in her old traditions or friendships. It was in her connection with Allah. The transformation was also deeply psychological. Without the unconditional support of her family, she had to find strength within herself. The loneliness that once scared her now became an opportunity for spiritual growth. The Quran became her comfort, her refuge, and each difficulty became a chance to draw closer to Allah. She realized that Islam not only filled the empty spaces in her life, but also healed the emotional wounds caused by rejection. Faith now was not just a religious practice, but a journey of self-knowledge and acceptance, of herself and others. Over time, she realized that true belonging was not in the parties, the family traditions, or the old friendships. Though she still felt a quiet longing for home and the celebrations that once filled her life, she began to understand that her true family was not defined by blood ties, but by the faith she shared with other Muslims. She found a new purpose and a new support system within the Muslim community, where she was received with understanding and respect, something she hadn't experienced before. The loneliness that initially felt like a burden came to be seen as an opportunity for spiritual growth. She got involved in volunteer work, connecting with other Muslim women who were on the same journey of faith. These new bonds of friendship, rooted in Islam, began to form what she came to see as a true family, where connections were deep and authentic. The support of the community made her realize that by being true to her faith, she was fulfilling a higher purpose. She also learned to value the small daily victories in her walk with Allah. With each prayer, with each act of devotion, she came closer to her true identity and left behind the shadows of past insecurities. Her journey of faith, once solitary, had now become a continuous source of strength. She understood that true freedom was not about being accepted by the world around her, but about being true to her own soul and to the divine purpose she had found in Islam.